Colombia is on strike, and the police and military are terrorizing the population to crush it. It kicked off when the far-right President Ivan Duque announced a wildly unpopular tax reform, imposing crushing austerity measures on middle-class and poor Colombians. Duque's proposal aimed to pay off debt in order to project stability and satisfy international investors. But that stability for capital means more instability for the tens of millions of Colombians struggling to put food on the table. The country is already in dire economic straits. According to official numbers, 43% of Colombians are in poverty and 15% are in extreme poverty. All of this has been exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. But the tax reform proposal is the trigger for deep discontent. The injustice for at least 6,402 innocent civilians murdered and covered up by the military and paramilitaries was known as the false positive scandal. The Duque government's attacks on the 2016 peace accord that ended the civil war with the left-wing guerrilla group known as the FARC, the extermination of social leaders, indigenous leaders, human rights defenders, and ex-FARC combatants, mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic, sheer corruption and impunity. All of this frustration was bubbling just beneath the surface, and Duque's austerity proposal boiled society over. Facing this unrest, the Colombian government, a supposed democracy, is acting much more like a far-right, even fascistic dictatorship. That's not hyperbole. This is the figure that provided the intellectual framework for how Colombian police understand the protests. His name is Alexis Lopez Tapia. He's a former leader of a now-dissolved Chilean neo-fascist party called the New Homeland Society. In February, he was invited by the Colombian military to give a presentation on how to defeat an uprising. He describes a pseudo-intellectual framework called dissipated molecular revolution, an intercontinental communist conspiracy that has taken place over the last 3+ decades to take over Latin America in a postmodern framework. It lumps together protesters, disparate social and indigenous movements, armed groups, human rights NGOs, civil society, anyone who dissents from the politics of the state as part of a subversive conspiracy that the military is wholly unprepared for.
Insurreccional revolucionario, que es la revolución molecular disipada propio de una filosofía, la deconstrucción propia a la vez de un principio que es el comunismo.
While this might sound like a crackpot conspiracy theory to the average viewer, it resonated with the most powerful figure in Colombia, former President Álvaro Uribe. Uribe referenced the neo-fascist Alexis Lopez's dissipated molecular revolution theory on Twitter. Uribe is the mastermind behind the bloodbath in Colombia. He's widely known to be a puppet master of the current president Ivan Duque, the figure giving the orders to beat and kill protesters. After a day of initial protests, Uribe sent out a tweet calling on police and soldiers to use their weapons to defend their integrity. Hours later, after a massive online campaign, Twitter deleted his tweet because it was clear incitement to violence. But it was too late. Colombian forces clearly understood Uribe's tweet as a green light. Police massacred 7 people in the city of Cali, a hotbed of protests. A cop chases down a protester and shoots him point blank. They deployed tanks to the streets, fired heavy weaponry indiscriminately in cities. A motorcycle cop tases a pedestrian. Here, Colombian police shoot at protesters from Black Hawk helicopters. The US gave these helicopters free of charge to Colombia as part of what's known as Plan Colombia, a massive military aid package that was ostensibly about fighting drug traffickers, but was really about defeating the leftist FARC insurgency and punishing their base of support among peasants in rural areas. In 2016, the FARC and the government made a peace deal. So aside from a few holdouts, the FARC doesn't exist. Drug traffickers, however, control nearly every aspect of the state, police, and military. How do we know this? A powerful narco named Jose Hernandez Aponte, aka El Ñeñe, coordinated a campaign to buy votes for President Duque using stolen money. This was ordered by Álvaro Uribe, and the legal system has never brought charges against Duque for this because it's under his and Uribe's control. Ñeñe was close with top figures from the military and police too, the same state forces that are supposed to be battling drug cartels. This is publicly available information, so the US government knows it even if the corporate-owned media ignores it. Colombia is a narco-state posing as a democracy, but with the ultra-violent crackdown on the protests, it's shedding its democratic facade. After 4 days of mass mobilizations all over the country, Duque announced the withdrawal of the proposal, but said another one would be announced in the coming days. A clear attempt to placate the protesters that failed. Hours after the announcement, Duque declared that he's sending the military to the streets.
Nuestras fuerzas militares, entrenadas para actuar en contextos urbanos, están apoyando el trabajo de la Policía Nacional.
At Duque's side was the army commander, Eduardo Zapatero, a hardliner who's been involved in the murder and cover-up of innocent civilians. He's known to be among the most extreme right-wing elements of the military and an instrument of Uribe.
Un amigo que es psiquiatra y se tomó el trabajo de mirarlo alguna vez en una entrevista y me dijo, ese señor es psicótico. Y cuando dijo que era psicótico era que tenía problemas mentales. Y la verdad, yo no sé pues, si Colombia si puede hacer ese diagnóstico, lo hizo un psiquiatra. Pero sí, la verdad, uno sí nota cierto desequilibrio, digo, en la manera de pensar de Zapatero.
Soon after, police and military killed 2 more protesters. In the city of Cali, where protests have been biggest, police shot a young protester named Nicolas Guerrero in the head. A popular Colombian DJ was live streaming from the protests, so tens of thousands of people watched Guerrero bleed to death. That DJ said his phone, Instagram, and Facebook accounts had been hacked, and his friends and family are receiving strange calls asking for his location, forcing him to flee Cali. As protesters were being massacred in the city of Pereira, the mayor called on private security to collaborate with the military and police.
Vamos a convocar a todos los gremios de la ciudad y a los miembros de la seguridad privada para hacer un frente común junto a la policía y el ejército para recuperar el orden en la seguridad ciudadana.
Tenemos un fenómeno que es el paramilitarismo y con estas decisiones y declaraciones tanto del alcalde de Pereira como el presidente Duque están llamando a que se reagrupe y a que se fortalezca el aparato paramilitar.
Meanwhile, vehicles with hidden license plates and men in high rubber boots, telltale signs of paramilitary activity began to appear. Dead chickens were left outside the headquarters of the left-wing Alternative Democratic Pole Party, an unmistakable death threat. Shadowy groups began to circulate explicit threats against protesters. Just days after the mayor of Pereira's call for private security to take control of the city, plainclothes gunmen pulled up in a car and shot Lucas Villa. Lucas Villa has been a highly visible figure in the protests.
¡Nos están matando en Colombia!
And was apparently targeted for his activism.
Ese déficit de impuestos que le quitó a los ricos a la clase media y a los pobres. Entonces ahora nos va a tocar pagar IVA en el agua, IVA en el internet, IVA en el café, en la comida, en todo. Por huevones.
At the time of this recording, 34 people have been reported killed, but that's almost certainly below the actual number. According to Colombian journalist Laura Sofia Mejia, the government is covering the real number up.
Hay una cosa importante que al tener un contacto con una de las instituciones averiguando el ingreso de muertos en una de las noches, nos dicen que internamente la decisión es que no le van a dar información a la prensa.
Throughout the strike, the Duque government has insisted that it's allowing peaceful protest and that the militarization is necessary to battle vandals and terrorists. Generating fear and portraying its heavy hand as the answer seemed to be the government's only chance at subduing the strike. While it was clear that the vandals and terrorists narrative was a lie from the start, it all came crashing down on Thursday when a group of men in civilian clothes got out of a vehicle in Cali and opened fire on a demonstration.
Un camión vestido de civil, este es uno de los camiones. Este es uno de los camiones. Estaban de civil. Velos como corren, velos como corren. Andan de civil, andan dando plomo. Le están dando plomo a la gente, sí señores.
Other demonstrators nearby managed to search the vehicle and found police gear inside.
Sacó eso a este carro y miren la belleza que nos encontramos.
Vea, el número, muchachos, el número.
Ya lo tengo.
¡Asesinos! ¡Asesinos!
Caught red-handed, the police were forced to admit the vehicle belonged to them. With their scare tactics failing, Duque and Uribe's murderous iron fist unable to break the strike, there's no telling where this goes. Anything could happen.